Nothing is technically wrong. The job is fine. The relationships are fine. There is no crisis, no diagnosis, no obvious explanation for the specific heavy sensation of being stuck in place while life continues moving around you like water around a rock. The easiest explanation, the one everyone reaches for first, is laziness. You just need to try harder, wake up earlier, want it more. And for a while, that explanation feels almost plausible because it comes with a built-in solution. Push harder and the stuckness should lift, except it doesn't. People who are stuck in this particular way are very often not lazy at all. They read the books, make the plans, set the alarms, and still find themselves standing in the exact same place months later, as though some invisible hand were quietly resetting the board each time real movement seemed possible. Carl Jung offered a very different explanation for this kind of stuckness, one that has nothing to do with effort or willpower. He proposed that a person cannot move fully forward while significant parts of themselves remain unintegrated, split off, exiled, operating from the shadows rather than as part of a coherent whole. Not because those parts are lazy, but because a house with entire rooms sealed shut cannot be lived in fully, no matter how hard you try to hustle through the hallway that remains open. This is the final piece of something we've been building across this series. First the repeating patterns, then the people who irritate us, and now the actual cost of leaving all of that material unexamined. Not chaos, not crisis, but a specific, quiet kind of paralysis that no amount of trying harder can move. Picture two people who both want to change careers. One of them researches, plans, hesitates, restarts, and a year later is still exactly where they started, exhausted from an effort that somehow never converts into movement. The other, facing a comparable level of risk and uncertainty, simply moves, imperfectly but forward. The difference between them is rarely discipline. It is far more often the sheer amount of internal negotiation the first person's mind has to complete before any external step becomes possible. Negotiation the second person's mind never had to run in the first place because there was less locked away requiring permission to proceed. To understand why an unintegrated shadow produces paralysis rather than simple discomfort, you have to understand what integration actually means and what happens in its absence. Across this series, we have talked about how certain qualities get exiled from conscious awareness in childhood: anger, need, ambition, sadness, confidence, whatever a particular environment couldn't tolerate. What we have not yet discussed is what happens to the total system when this exile becomes extensive enough. Jung's model suggests that psychic energy is not infinite, and a significant portion of it gets permanently allocated to maintaining the wall between the acceptable self and everything locked outside it. Donald Winnicott described a related phenomenon in his work on the false self. He observed that some people build such an elaborate, effortful performance of an acceptable identity that almost no energy remains for authentic engagement with life. The false self is not merely a mask worn occasionally. For some people, it becomes a full-time occupation, consuming the very resources that would otherwise go toward genuine movement, decision-making, and growth. This explains the specific texture of this kind of stuckness. It does not feel like sadness exactly, and it does not feel like fear in any identifiable way. It feels like wading through something thick, like trying to run in a dream where the legs simply will not cooperate. That sensation is not a mystery once you understand. Where the energy has gone, it has not vanished. It is being spent continuously and invisibly, holding a door shut against material that was exiled decades ago and has never once been allowed to renegotiate its terms. Consider a person who learned early that expressing need was met with irritation or withdrawal. As an adult, this person may find that even simple acts of asking for help, delegating a task, requesting a deadline extension, admitting confusion in a meeting require a disproportionate amount of internal preparation, far beyond what the actual request warrants. From the outside, this looks like avoidance or procrastination or a strange reluctance to do something objectively easy. From the inside, it is an old negotiation being rerun every single time. Is it safe to need something out loud? The negotiation usually resolves in favor of silence, and the task simply does not get delegated. The deadline does not get discussed. The confusion stays hidden, not from laziness, but from an old cost-benefit calculation still running on outdated information. Karen Horney's concept of the idealized self adds a further dimension. She observed that many people construct an image of who they are supposed to be that is so far removed from who they actually are that maintaining the gap becomes exhausting in itself. Every action gets filtered through the question of whether it matches the idealized image, rather than simply being taken because it moves a real integrated person towards something they actually want. This filtering process is slow, effortful, and utterly invisible from the outside, which is exactly why it gets mistaken so often for simple laziness. The stuck feeling, then, is not the absence of effort. It is often the presence of an enormous, continuous effort being spent somewhere you cannot see, on a task that has nothing to do with the goals you consciously believe you are failing to reach. Here is the specific mechanism that turns an unintegrated shadow into paralysis, rather than simply an occasional inconvenience. Every unintegrated part of the self still requires a decision to be made about it in every new situation life presents. If ambition was exiled in childhood, then every opportunity that calls for ambition now triggers an internal conflict. The part of you that wants to reach for it, and the older, more deeply rehearsed part that still believes reaching is dangerous or shameful. This conflict happens quickly, often below conscious awareness, but it is not free. It costs time, costs clarity, and very often resolves in favor of inaction. Since inaction, however unsatisfying, at least avoids reactivating the old danger. Multiply this single conflict across every exiled quality a person carries and across every decision point in an ordinary day, and the resulting drag becomes substantial. This is not laziness. It is closer to trying to drive a car with the parking brake engaged. The engine works fine. The will to move is genuinely present, but something structural is quietly resisting the exact motion being attempted. Nathaniel Branden's work on self-esteem offers a useful lens here. He argued that authentic action requires a reasonably unified sense of self standing behind it. A person needs to know, at some basic level, who is doing the acting. When large portions of that self are exiled and unintegrated, action becomes genuinely harder to initiate. Not because the person lacks discipline, but because the acting agent itself is fragmented, uncertain which of its many disowned parts might suddenly veto whatever was just decided. Bessel van der Kolk's research adds a physiological dimension. Chronic internal conflict, even when it never rises to conscious awareness, keeps the nervous system in a low-grade state of activation, similar to holding a muscle tensed for years without noticing. That tension does not feel like a specific emotion. It often just feels like tiredness, heaviness, or a vague resistance to starting anything. Precisely the symptoms, most commonly and most inaccurately, labelled as laziness by the person experiencing them and everyone around them. This is why advice like just start so often fails for this specific kind of stuckness. The problem was never a missing first step. The problem is a parking brake nobody has yet identified, let alone released. The cost of remaining in this state indefinitely rarely announces itself as a single crisis. It accumulates as a kind of quiet erosion, one that is easy to misread as simply how life is. The first cost is time itself, spent in a strange holding pattern that produces neither the relief of rest nor the satisfaction of progress. Years can pass this way, each one resembling the last, while the actual clock of a person's one life continues regardless of whether they feel able to move within it. The second cost is the specific, corrosive shame of believing the stuckness is a personal moral failing. Since laziness is the explanation everyone reaches for first, including the person experiencing it, an enormous amount of additional suffering gets added on top of the original paralysis. Not just stuck, but stuck and supposedly deserving of it. A double burden that has nothing to do with the actual mechanism at work. The third cost is the slow narrowing of what feels possible. Marcus Aurelius wrote that our life is what our thoughts make it. And while he meant this as an invitation to reclaim agency, the same principle operates in reverse for someone convinced their stuckness reflects a character flaw. The belief itself becomes a further wall, making the exiled material even harder to approach, since approaching it would require admitting that something more complex than laziness has been operating all along. There is a particular, quiet moment that surfaces for many people eventually, often while watching someone else move easily through a decision that has paralyzed them for months or years. A specific, uncomfortable question can arise. What if this was never about trying harder? What if the actual obstacle has been sitting in a sealed room this entire time, waiting for someone to finally open the door instead of continuing to sprint down the same open hallway? There is also a specific relational cost that tends to go unnoticed until it has already done damage. People who are stuck in this way often become quietly resentful of others who move freely and easily through the same kinds of decisions without fully understanding why that ease bothers them so much. That resentment, familiar now from earlier in this series, is itself another signpost. Not evidence that the other person had it easier in some unfair way, but a pointer back toward the exact material still waiting, unexamined, in the sealed rooms of the person doing the resenting. There is often a specific, disorienting relief that arrives the moment someone finally considers that their stuckness was never a character flaw at all. It does not resolve anything by itself. Naming the mechanism does not instantly reopen every sealed room. And Jung was clear that integration is a slow, ongoing process rather than a single insight that fixes everything at once. He described it as making the unconscious conscious, piece by piece, and insisted the process rarely feels dramatic. It usually looks like small repeated moments of noticing the internal veto before it wins, noticing the old rule being applied to a situation that no longer requires it, noticing that trying harder was never actually the missing ingredient. What changes once this becomes visible is the target of the effort. Instead of aiming more force at the same locked door, the actual work becomes locating which specific rooms have been sealed, and slowly, carefully, learning it might be safe to open them. This is not a fast process, and it is not one this video can complete for you, but it is a fundamentally different task than the one most people have been exhausting themselves with for years. If any part of this series, the patterns, the people who irritate you, and now the stuckness, has described something familiar, that is not a coincidence. And it does not mean something is wrong with you. It means there is unexamined material with a very old, very consistent signature, still quietly running large parts of the show. This channel exists to sit with exactly these kinds of patterns. If that is the kind of exploration you are drawn to, consider staying. There is no simple technique offered here to finish this work in one sitting. But the next time stuckness arrives and the word laziness rises up automatically to explain it, there is a different question now available to ask instead. What part of me might still be sealed away? And what would it take to finally let it back into the room? If this reached something in you, say so in the comments. Specifically, if you're willing, what nothing's wrong, but I still feel stuck, has looked like in your own life. And if you know someone who has spent years calling themselves lazy for something that was never really about effort, this might be the first time anyone has offered them a truer name for it.